I want to offer you a second really important implication in out of Luke chapter 20, verses 24 and 25. This is a really famous place where Jesus says, "Show me a denarius." After asking this question, "Is it lawful for us to give tribute to Caesar or not? Show me a denarius." And then they say that Caesar is on it. He says, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God that which is God's." And in the first reflection, I just talked about the complexity of how the kingdom of God is primarily not about power, especially the power of the state in the world. In this reflection, I want to talk about what is it that we owe our country. That Jesus says you owe something to Caesar. If you are a citizen under you, and he's the rightful ruler, you know what? You owe something to that government, to that leadership. And it isn't simply just said here. That's one of the implications said here too. That Jesus says you owe something to Caesar. This is what it's saying. It's said in another place. Romans chapter 13 says it this way. So in the Apostle Paul commands in Romans chapter 13, verse 1 says, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed." The authority of the state isn't just the authority of the state. The authority of the state really, ultimately, is something God has ordained the authority of the state. Now, I don't want to go into this there's a complexity, is that maybe the state is a wicked state. Of course, we don't just obey the state. We always obey God over the state. God is a greater authority. So if what the state is calling us to do is wicked and would go against the authority of God, then obviously we would thus then engage civil disobedience. But the normal call of God is that the authority of the state is important, even if the authority is Caesar, who's not even good. So it's an extraordinary things that the early Christians were called, that Jesus would even say to Jewish disciples. And I want to just, I want to go into a whole overall unpacking of Romans 13, but just listen to how it goes on. It says, verse 13, verse 5, it basically says that, maybe if we receive, there's a possibility, if you're bad citizens, and if you are bad in terms of how we obey God, that God can use the authority of the state and the sword, of the power of the sword, as a form of wrath against us. But verse 5 goes, "Therefore, one," that is the Christian person, "must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience." Your own conscience should speak to you that you shouldn't just be, casting off the authority of the state, of the government. Verse 6, "For because of this you also pay taxes." Same thing that Jesus says, you owe. And it's right and good. You should pay taxes. "For the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing." So obviously when we're talking about ministers of God, we're not talking about like pastors, spiritual authority of God, but ministers, that is servants of God. The authorities are servants of God, and we owe them taxes. So verse 7, "Pay to all what is owed to them," certainly your taxes. "Taxes to whom taxes are owed. Revenue to whom revenue is owed." But listen to this. "Respect to whom respect is owed. Honor to whom honor is owed." And, another important implication of what Jesus is saying, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, to God what is God, is we owe respect to our government. We owe honor to our government. We certainly owe revenue and taxes to our government. And you know what? That's a command of God. And so one of the really important implications of this point from Luke chapter 20 is that we are certainly citizens of the kingdom of God, but the citizens, and that's our ultimate allegiance. But you should also be a really good citizen to your earthly kingdom. So if you are so to Paul, if he was a Roman, and he was a Roman citizen, you know what? He understood that from God, from Christ, if he was really under the kingship of Christ, he should be a really good Roman citizen. If you are an American citizen today, you may be very troubled. And I'm not sure which way you're troubled. You may be troubled from the political right if you're more politically liberal. You may be troubled from the political left if you're more politically conservative. But one of the things that I want to ask you to do, and especially if you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, certainly if you're a member of Revive, is understand that to be a citizen of the kingdom of God and have Jesus as our king, we ought to be really good citizens of America. We should be the best citizens of America. And so, this being, of course, the authority of America over us is certainly a lesser authority, but it has still, nonetheless, in Jesus' mind, has a rightful call upon us. That we owe revenue, we owe honor, we owe respect to that which is to Caesar to give to Caesar. And thus, we should be seeking the shalom of our city, the shalom of our country, the peace and prosperity, the full flourishing of our country, certainly the justice and mercy of our country. In all kinds of different ways, we should be seeking to offer that to our neighbors. The greatest commandment from God is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. The second command, which is more like command 1A, is love your neighbors as yourself. That includes how we operate as citizens and how we think about our government. And of course, how we think about government is really profound, how we think about our neighbors as citizens. So brothers and sisters, there's a second great important implication, is to be not just good, but to be the best citizens of our country in this time and place.